This title is more than just a reminiscence of a summer afternoon. It is also the gaze of a child's heart that smiles at the world, that feels sincere gratitude for the sun, the wind, and the warmth of the hand of a friend. This story is an attempt to bring back a day lived or long imagined, seen through the window of Pollyanna. It's this that makes for a stirring voyage, one that silently bears witness to a kind of optimism many of us might have long since forgotten. An optimism that finds happiness in the smallest crumbs of joy, in the mundane rhythm of daily life. He realized in this video itself that the video isn't just a story, it is a realization, because each summer day gifts a surprise, and occasionally that treasure can be found in the simple gaze of a child's heart. Before you start watching, I have a really quick favor to ask. Please watch this video until the very end. With every word you follow, every scene you witness, every emotion you experience, your own heart also starts taking baby steps. Please just get down in the comments how you feel right now. The first thing that comes to the mind. Perhaps a memory or an emotion or even a single word. And remember, this video exists not only to be told, but to be lived together with you. Deep breath in. Let's look through Pollyanna's window together. The house was big, but it was not clogged with people. The sun was flooding in through the curtains, like rivers of gold, drowning the shadows on the forming ice walls and making it warm. Pollyanna was sitting backward in an old chair by the window. Her knees were toward the glass, and her chin was nestled softly in her two warm little hands. The flowers outside were being caressed by a gentle breeze, and birds were singing their own songs atop branches, confiding their own secrets. Everything was so perfectly in its place that it sent a soft shiver through the soul. Summer was like something hopped from the pages of a child's dream journal, wholly sweet and charming. This morning, Pollyanna had been awake with the birds. Maybe it was the most beautiful day of the summer. Who knew? Something might change by the end of it. Sometimes we feel this during ostensibly normal days, when a still possibility starts humming under the surface. Pollyanna loved that feeling, for inside it was hope, inside it was vibrancy, and inside it was the miracle of life's serendipity. And as she made her way down the stairs in her bare feet and drew breath over the sweet smell of cake wafting through the kitchen of her great aunt, that feeling got a tiny bit stronger. It was about to be the start of a summer memory. Ordinary as it sounded, it was brimming to the top with, for everything, after all, starts from a tiny corner of the heart. And for Pollyanna, that corner was the window in the morning. Light. Breakfast was modest, but full of love. Her aunt had sliced bread thinly, spread it with butter, and was talking about the day's developments. But the little girl wasn't in the mood for those words. Her eyes had fastened on the cherry tree in front of the window. A little sparrow she had known the summer before had perched on a tree branch. How strange it was. It had been only a year, but things hadn't changed much, and some things seemed true only when they were repeated. In Pollyanna's eyes, the day had been one of revelation. She needed to locate her old notebook that she had hidden under the old plum tree in the backyard. Everything, her notes, sketches of flowers, leaves that she collected throughout the last summer, all was in that notebook. It was a kind of treasure chest containing a child's world. Every page was a summer afternoon, he said, a smile, a rainbow after the rain. Without time to put her shoes on, she dashed out the door. The earth was cold, but friendly. The cold at her feet seemed to pulse summer. The garden hadn't quite stirred yet. Flowers appeared to have awakened. But the world had already opened for Pollyanna. In her hand, she carried a sprig of dried lavender, the lavender that evoked her mother every time she put her nose to it. For her, summer was not merely the sun, it was the perfume of memories. It was as she came across the old plum tree that she saw the shadows lying on the ground. It was pretty, even in shadow, and sometimes the shadows had even more to say than the light. She knelt down and touched the ground with her hands. She remembered precisely where she'd placed it, beneath a little stone. As she touched it, a butterfly flew up alongside her. Maybe it too was part of this memory. As she cradled the notebook in her hands, she paged carefully through it. Some words had faded, some of the pages had yellowed, but the emotions remained. There was a reason why memories do not die with age. They become whispers. Pollyanna bent fascinated eyes on one of the pages. It read, "It rained today. I didn't get wet. The grass protected me." She smiled. What an innocent sentence. And yet, how true it was. Life could be as easy as the patch of grass that provided cover. After all, the air had warmed some by around late morning. Pollyanna lay back on the grass, her notebook on her lap. The sky was blue, but it was transfixingly silent. The clouds came and went, like old friends. Each piece of fluff seemed to resemble something. One looked like a rabbit, another like a scuzzy old teapot. It was a game that never stopped. For kids, the sky was always full of stories. She shouted Pollyanna when her aunt stepped out into the garden. "Get up," she said. "We're going to the market." A child's delectable curiosity began to rise in her, for the market was the new faces, the old friends, the baskets of fruit, the toys, and perhaps the little surprises. But what Pollyanna loved best was to look in people's faces. Every face had a story, and every pair of eyes a riddle, and she collected them all. When they started, some things had already been put in the little wagon. Apple jelly, baskets the men had made, and some vials of dried mint. Pollyanna inspected everything one by one, because in this world, the more you observed the details, the more you learned. Life was in the details. Even the glass jars were flashing me messages, shining back the sunlight. If only you knew how to look. While they were walking down the road, she found a dog she recognized. She had found him the summer before, with a damaged leg. Now he was fine, and his fur was glistening. Pollyanna stooped and patted his head. The dog lay down soft against her. There was love in that silence, and it was deep. Words weren't necessary, because some of those feelings couldn't be expressed by email. The market was a rainbow of color when they entered. The children's wails, the vendors' offering calls, the bouquet of mixed fruit scents, all commingled. But for Pollyanna, the real magic was to be found at an old woman's stall. And there they sat, the little glass figurines, bright, multicolored, full of light. The woman turned and smiled at her. "Last summer, we were talking about lavender," she said. Pollyanna's eyes lit up. They remembered not only names, but feelings. The lady handed Pollyanna a small glass bird. "This is for you," she said. "Don't forget to fly." So Pollyanna sat, watching the dancing rainbow-hued bits of glass as they came and went through the sunbeam on the head of the wax doll. And another of the short summer days slipped by. But one corner of her heart opened for life, like little birds, was composed of light and precious moments. In the afternoon, the sky had mellowed into its warmth, and the breeze had become more bountiful. Pollyanna, taking her aunt's hand, turned and started toward home with the tiny glass bird nestling in her palm. The most immense happiness was confined in that small thing. To the outward view, it might seem only a rather inferior piece of jewelry, but to Pollyanna, her heart was swelling with love and with gratitude for the beautiful gift. Maybe the whole summer was like that little glass bird, see-through, feeble. If you did not carry it properly, it could break, but if you held it up to the light, it would sparkle. The sunlight no longer shone in through the window when they got back. 2 Saturdays, 1. In the room, the long clock shadows gave a cool rumerica. The room was very cool. Pollyanna kicked off her shoes and sat down on the veranda. She put her bare feet on the ground and relaxed in her chair. The glass bird was in her hand still, and a story was stirring in her heart when she closed her eyes. It was as though every lived moment of the day was reassembling, dancing lightly back through her mind again. And now she knew that memory could be as gentle as a dream. You couldn't tell where it started or stopped, only that you were in the thick of it. That was when Pollyanna realized there are some silences that can be very loud. Quiet, yet full of meaning. Among those vapors were the rustling of leaves, the far-off clatter of a wagon's wheels, the murmuring of birds who were speaking to the wind. Without so much as lifting a finger, a child could get things wrong, because the world could still teach without speaking. And summer was the best time for that silence. It uttered no words, it cried out no words. It only was. Pollyanna thought that state of affairs to be splendid, the miracles that lie within the ordinary, within the everyday. The sun dipped lower, and throughout the afternoon, there was the tinkle of tea being made in the kitchen. Her aunt, as usual, had put the teapot onto the cooker and was bringing out the old china cups. Pollyanna was accustomed to such sounds. Each had a place in the house, notes and a melody, the soft clink of cups, the quiet gurgle of poured tea, the creak of the door. All had their places in the overall tapestry, and for Pollyanna's sake, each held a treasure. Then, when her aunt left the little tray on the porch table, Pollyanna opened her eyes. "These are so pretty, these cups," she said. "One of them is cracked, but it's beautiful still." Her aunt smiled. "Some things are beautiful because they're cracked," she said. "Just like people." Pollyanna considered this for a moment. She discovered that cracks weren't merely evidence of brokenness. They were the traces of a life lived. Each crack was a story, and a story was not a defect, but a gem. Not incomplete, but whole. There were petite fours with the tea, fragrant of lemon, with a tender crust, and dusted with powdered sugar. That first bite was all childhood for pleasure. Pollyanna nibbled at them, for she did not want the moment to end. The evenings of summer days were invariably a little sad, as if the day itself was not yet ready to be done, wanted to stay a while longer, the golden hour just before the sky turned dark, when everything looked better than it really was. For Pollyanna, it was the most wonderful time of day. Suddenly, she got up, left the glass bird on the table, and ran to the garden. Her aunt looked after her and said nothing. It was such a familiar expression on Pollyanna's face. It's the moments of sudden, overflowing joy we have as children, the moments we can't resist exploration, because you just cannot really understand something without living it. She discovered the small patch at the rear of the garden where they had put yellow flowers in together last year. The flowers were almost standing up. Some were bent, others were just starting to bloom. Pollyanna sank upon her knees and laid her hand softly on the earth. In that instant, she felt a bit like a plant herself. Her roots ran back to this house, this soil, this very moment in time, and every leaf was a day she'd lived. That's what she realized the moment she understood. Childhood is something we don't just live through. It grows. It grows. And every memory is a new flower. There were some flowers and an old swing. Its ropes were frayed, its seat worn from years in the sun. But it was still in one piece. Pollyanna sat down gently. She didn't touch the ground. Instead, she gave herself a gentle push past the ankle-deep water. The swing groaned against the stillness of sky. The higher she ascended, the closer the sky appeared to come. With each advance, childhood drew deeper around them, and every time she came back within her, a summer's day got a little older. The more she flew toward the sky, the more she wondered, what is time? Why do some moments seem never to pass, while others disappear as if flowing through fingers? Perhaps time passed differently within a child's heart. Perhaps children did not mark time with clocks, but measured it with memories. Pollyanna ran to seize her notebook to jot down her impressions. She'd lifted the glass bird from the table, and now she hunted for her notebook and wrote, "Each time I swing, it's like I'm swinging time, not the other way around." When the sun set altogether, the sky went a pale pink. The paint went from one color to another, but the feelings, always the same. Pollyanna came back and sat down on the veranda, opened the book on her lap, and laid the glass bird nearby on the window ledge. It was another summer day, and we were closing in on the evening. Yet inside that day was a lifetime of feeling. Sometimes one day can contain the emotions of an entire year, and when those feelings are inscribed on a child's little notebook, they are as if silent and eternal. Pollyanna drank the last of her tea. She stared off into the distance and thought, what had she learned today? Maybe it was all something she already knew, but that it was yet also lovely, for that beauty lives in somberness, that broken teacups also have their value, that glass birds, though they can't fly, they can also dream, and above all, that a summer day feels not only warm, but tenderly warm, tenderly aglow. She retired to her room as evening descended. She opened the window. The crickets chiming outside enfolded her like a blanket of tranquility. She set the glass bird on her bedside table, stuffed the notebook into a drawer. Then, before she closed her eyes, she said, "Today, again, I became a memory." Early the next morning, the birds outside Pollyanna's window woke her with their sweet chattering. Then, opening her eyes, she saw that the room was already full of mild golden morning light, and that the white curtains were gently swaying, causing little shadow plays upon the walls. A smile had cracked across her face as soon as she opened her eyes, like a leftover smile that had slept beside her through the night 469. Outside, the day had grown warm once more, but there was an unmistakable snap to the morning air. It was all starting over again. A new day. The same, but not tall the same. Pollyanna arose and went to the window. She noticed a cat playing in one corner of the garden. It rolled like a dervish on the ground in its yellow and white coat. Then it chased a leaf, and then its tail. Pollyanna regarded it doubtfully for a time. She didn't ponder, and she didn't dream, and she didn't look away. She just watched, because this much, sometimes, was what you lived for. Not about participating, but about what it is to be standing on the verge and feeling. And children often had an instinct for this fine thing. Breakfast had been laid out on the veranda that morning. Her aunt had gotten up, as she always did, and set out bread with jam, fresh milk, and tomatoes she had picked in the garden. Pollyanna's chair, its pushed-back place, had stood in the shade, at the corner of the table. Tonight, as always, she took a seat at the table and paused for a moment before eating. She closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. The air smelled of the morning, of flowers, of breakfasts that were mother's arms. "Now, if I can go walk," said Pollyanna, "but not too far, just to revisit the old ways." Her aunt nodded. "Sometimes you should walk the paths you already do," she said. "If you cross the same path twice, you're seeing two different worlds, with two different sets of eyes." That sentence lodged in Pollyanna's brain like a seed. Each walk was an event of exploration and a coming home. She slipped into her shoes, picked up her notebook, and stepped outside. Without going too far, she entered the forest that encircled her. This was a route she took many times, but that morning, everything felt new. The sun entered at a different spot. The birds twittered more loudly, and the sound of the leaves was sweeter. Pollyanna went, and she knew everything. For each step, she thought of a sentence, and sometimes wrote it down. "Nature is like people," she wrote in her notebook, showing a different face at every glance. A little brook was at the end of the path. The water was cold, transparent, and in a hurry. Pollyanna sat on the stones. She stooped, dipped her fingers in the brook, and followed it in silence. The water did not say, but it did speak. Follow the twists and turns, and they all said something. Pollyanna struggled to think about the strange peace now stealing into her, but the words did their creator poor service. So she simply felt, and because there are some feelings that have no language, they just are, like childhood, like summer. She rested her back against the old poplar tree at the brook. She shut her eyes and heard the wind talk to the leaves. It was odd how animated nature could be so silent. Then, suddenly, she thought of her grandfather. He used to bring her here every morning when she was small, and they would sit in silence by the stream. They would not talk, but Pollyanna never forgot those days. Maybe the most memorable things are what isn't said, the most loved that did not touch. Somewhere in her subconscious, Pollyanna felt this. She slowly stood up. On the return journey, a ladybird blundered past the blossoms, and Pollyanna held out her finger, and the beetle hesitated, then flew away once more. Luck, Pollyanna whispered. Perhaps fortune is just a rendezvous. Now's the right time, with the right heart. She also wrote that Senti, when she got back home, the sun was higher in the sky than it was at dawn, and everything seemed so much brighter. Her aunt was outdoors, hanging clothes on the line. Towels snapped in the breeze, more like transitory flags against the sky. Pollyanna stepped upon the veranda, removed her shoes, and placed herself in the chair. She took a deep breath. Nature, in its entirety of morning, was in her. Her body was less tired than her soul, but it was a good kind of tired, rich, slow, and conscious, with a reserved outlook on life. Chowdhury looked up in the afternoon. The rain started. First there was the faraway rumble of thunder, and then, ever so gradually, gray clouds filled in the sky. Pollyanna's head dropped back against the window. First one drop, then another, and then the rain came down in torrents, no more seconds, and suddenly the world was a different place. Summer's bold front had receded, leaving behind it a new lugubriousness. Pollyanna quaked, but not in fear. For some rains don't fall to water. They fall to wash our hearts, our minds, our history. The sound of the rain was almost like music. Pollyanna scampered to her room and secured her notebook. Every time a drop of rain struck a window, she listened. She said and wrote, "The rain is a tear-streaked face," but she wasn't sad. It felt like relief, like a release. In the rain, standing can feel a bit like crying with no tears. She felt this. She wasn't sad, but a tear rolled from her eye. For happiness, when very strong, is wont to knead itself into weeping. When the evening arrived and rain ceased, the garden seemed to have renewed itself. It was good country earth, and the smell of it was rich. The leaves were glossier, the sky brighter. Again Pollyanna stepped out on the veranda, and barefoot, she started across the garden. This it was, then, that raised that different coolness in her. No longer the same coolness she had felt in the morning. This coolness implied having endured something. She had gone through the day, and she was still standing, still alive. She and her aunt had a light supper, simple, yet delicious. Pasta, green beans and olive oil, and homemade lemonade. Each flavor had a hint of a summer night. Pollyanna laid her fork down slowly. "Aunt," she said, "I think I've aged some today." Her aunt's smile grew, the wrinkles at the sides of her eyes crinkling more. "To feel is what helps us become better," she said. "But growing is not the same as aging. Growing means deepening, dusty dark." Pollyanna betook herself to her room. She looked out the window. A couple of stars twinkled in the rain-washed sky. The moon had not yet risen. The glass bird was still on the sill. It didn't shimmer with light, but it was present, silent, static, like a friend waiting. Pollyanna had brought her writing pad to her bedside, and now in her lap she had the sentence, "Only a summer day isn't a warm, it's a wet. But this wetness is something completely beyond the rain." When she shut her eyes, she took what then remained of the morning and the sound of the stream. the movement of the ladybug's wings, and the scent of rain along with her. This had all unfolded during a single summer day, and the whole of it had grown an everlasting memory within Pollyanna. This morning, it was something else. The sunlight wasn't making a gentle, filtered entrance through the crack in the curtains. It was coming squarely, directly in. It sounded as though it wanted to rouse every part of the house, leaving not a single place unturned. There came a time when Pollyanna opened her eyes and saw in the sunlight, for the first time, the big, round, sunshiny face of the clock and the jars of crimson jelly on the table. Yesterday's rain had cleaned the window, as though it had blotted out its solitude. In the morning light, the glass bird appeared to have come back to life. Pollyanna picked it up, handling it lovingly. It was light in her hands, but it held a silence, as if days, possibly years, stretched between them. Today, she wanted a day without words. Sometimes even words require silence, because all you need sometimes is to see, to feel, to smell, to live with the beat of the 24-hour cycle. Pollyanna didn't take her notebook out this morning. Today was a wordless day, a day only for memory, only for the heart. She went out into the garden. The ground was still moist from the rain, but the flowers towered, their leaves brighter. The roses were panting in the early hours. The hydrangeas drooped slightly. They weighed heavily with the drip. Pollyanna hid among the flowers. She put out her hand and touched the ground, neutrally snug, warm and dampish, but not wet, not even the brown specks accumulating under her nails got to her. This touch was a thanksgiving to nature, to life, to this summer day. And then later, her aunt came with a basket. "Shall we pick some fruit?" she asked. Pollyanna made no answer, unless the soft light which swept into her eyes from somewhere back in their depths could be considered as such. They went together to the little orchard at the end of the garden. The cherry trees were laden with fruit. Some of the low limbs drooped to the ground. Pollyanna softly pushed back the branch and reached out for the cherries. Her aunt was sorting through the mulberries. Her hands dyed purple. They were silent as they did, and that silence conveyed a kind of togetherness that was more fulfilling than words. Once Pollyanna raised her eyes heavenward. There were no clouds. The blue stretched serenely on and on, the sort of emptiness a child might stare into blithely, not menacing, not oppressive, just there, watching, and nothing else. She squinted at the sun, the heat on her face glowing in her from fairy tale to the heart. The sun is a refutation. Also, she thought, it comes up every day and retells it all over, and it never grows tired. When they paused at last in the gathering of the fruit, her aunt's fingers were purple with mulberry splotches, and Pollyanna's forehead was moist with perspiration. They sat under a tree. They set their basket on the earth. Sometimes life isn't beautiful just because of what you gather, but who you gather it with, her aunt said. Pollyanna lowered her head. These words rang in her ears for a long time, and the afternoon was quiet. There was nothing to listen to but the ticking of the clock inside the house, and a faint sound of sheep's piping far off. The tune was soft but familiar. In the corner of the kitchen was a little three-legged stool on which Pollyanna sat. she gazed out the window. She picked up on the feeling of time dragging. All was slow, broad, and dreamlike in its peace, as though for a moment life itself had consented to a suspension of hostilities in that house. Her aunt had made lemonade. She stood, pouring it from a large pitcher into 2 glasses. Mist formed along the rims. With that first swallow, Pollyanna sipped the lemon's tang and tasted the honey's sweetness, like life itself, a flavor that makes you frown at first and then smile. 'Tis not always the initial taste that touches thy soul. Sometimes 'tis the aftertaste, she thought. She wedged herself upon some grass outside. Her eyes gazed into the sky. There were no clouds, but they could be seen in the mind's eye. The sky was a palette, an open, empty landscape, forged by the mind of a child. Pollyanna shut her eyes and settled herself to dreaming. She flies invisible dreams out in the clear sky. Kites, stories with wings, colored gazes. If there was someone there, waiting for her, her mother, she thought. Just then, not her voice, but her scent. Not all memories are heard. They're smelt, and summer was the most honest season to bear them. Pollyanna rooted her face in the grass. That indescribable summer smell of soil and sunlight, a scent familiar to a child gripping his mother's skirt. There was a single tear running down her cheek, but she was still smiling. She saw her aunt knitting in the late afternoon. Her hands worked in time with the yarn, her lips reading silently. Pollyanna didn't comprehend the words, but she recognized the tune, an old lullaby sung by a mother, then an aunt, and one day, maybe by her, to her child, wordless but familiar. As evening approached, Pollyanna slipped across the porch. She hadn't written a word all day, but her heart was brimming. Not all feelings must have words in order to be lived. She only clasped her notebook without opening it for a while, and then set it down by her bed instead, for some days are only meant to be lived, not said. The first stars were coming out, and Pollyanna wished on one of them, a wish that the only her heart could fathom. She put her head down on the pillow. She watched the glint of the glass bird until she fell asleep, and with silent joy in her heart, the remembrance of the day lay down to rest. A memory that didn't require a sentence, a photograph, or practical. You had to be there and feel summer for a day. This time the chill of the morning was more noticeable. The curtains fluttered sleepily beneath the voice of the wind. I was thinking of Pollyanna, who didn't lie in bed and roll about until she grew sick of the twirl, and then sat up the moment she awoke. Today, something was different. It might have been the weather, too, but the beat of her heart wasn't. Sometimes, it would take only the softest of feelings to switch the whole color of a day. She felt the presence of an unseen visit with her today, an inner anticipation, perhaps a letter, perhaps news, perhaps someone. She conducted her morning routine in silence as she did every morning. She washed her hands, then studied her image in the mirror a bit more. She had that shimmering light in the corner of her eye, remnant innocence of sleep, or just the light of the sun playing around. Who knew? But she actually saw herself in that moment. Not the only form reflected in the looking glass, but the one in the kid as well. Her aunt looked thoughtful over the breakfast table. She was revolving her teacup with her hand, her eyes in the far away. Pollyanna did not inquire. At times, it was even more respectful to say nothing. Presently, her aunt turned her gaze towards her and merely observed, "This is the day a letter may come." Pollyanna nodded. Those words breathed meaning into morning's anticipation. Her heart had not, as it turned out, been beating in vain. A letter. Maybe what was today's news was inside an envelope. Everything in Pollyanna's life happened so quietly, yet sometimes, with only a word or two, whole worlds shifted. And envelopes didn't just contain paper. They were also the vessels of longing, of guilt, of an incomplete love. Today, the sound of the postman's footsteps wasn't just a set of footsteps. The sun put just a few different angled lights on everything by now at least. As the tablecloth in the garden fluttered in the wind, a familiar bell chimed in the distance. Pollyanna didn't jump up. There was no rush. This wasn't a race. It was a rendezvous, and each gathering had to honor the rhythm of waiting. The postman pulled up outside the door. Her aunt fixed her headscarf and followed her outside. Pollyanna went to the window, but she did not raise the curtain, however. When her aunt came back, she had more than just a fancy envelope. There were tears in her eyes again. "It's for you," she told Pollyanna, laying the envelope on the edge of Pollyanna's desk. It was a white envelope from a handwriting she knew. And what was this? A friend she had known months ago, who had not written? Or was this far, far of sound of a father's voice? And Pollyanna touched it with trembling hands. Then, softly, she unfolded the envelope. Inside was a brief letter, though the words were part of a far larger story. When she read, she looked not so much at the words as at the feelings behind them. In its curves of handwriting, there was longing, regret, and even a kind of hope. The letter was from a friend she played with as a child. The friend was now a student at a distant school, and she wrote that she should be near her aunt part of the summer, but that she longed to see Pollyanna. Pollyanna thought of the time that had passed since she had seen him before. It was not that they had quarreled, but time had a way of drawing distant those with no particular explanation. Now, a hand was reaching out from beyond that time. "Do you still remember me?" But wasn't in the letter, was the sentence. That echoed the longest of all. Her aunt had slipped silently into the kitchen. Pollyanna sat stunned and motionless with the letter. It had stirred up a hidden portion inside her. The summer mornings, the days they spent running by the riverside, the fireflies they gathered in jars, all so far away, and also, somehow, present. The game and its play. That day in the afternoon, Pollyanna went down the river path to walk, swinging onto a road she'd last walked as a child. Even feeling the grass on her skin seemed redolent, more of a past memory. The river was still there, same bend, same stones, but a little quieter. Pollyanna sat on the rocks. She tossed a little pebble into the water. The ripples grew, then faded. "I bet she still throws pebbles, too. I wonder," thought she, "do the people who played them as children change, or just disappear?" And then she heard a footstep. When she spun around, no one was there. but sometimes even a sound could call forth memories. At the thought, Pollyanna closed her eyes and tried to hear that old laughter once more, the patter of feet in the water, the words mixed so with the little gurgling sounds, the music of a leisurely world. Somehow on the way back, something inside her felt lighter. She was going to write a response to the letter, only the real answer wouldn't be in the words. It would be in what the words made her feel. If you can, I'll wait for you by the river, she might write. Time could not be stopped, but one could still pass through it, sometimes by reaching for another hand, and sometimes simply by sitting on a stone. That night on the veranda, beneath a silent summer sky, she had taken out her notebook, some more expression. Finally, for the day, this was the first time today she'd felt like writing. Today, an old friend arrived back. She opened, and sometimes the most beautiful thing is the ability to wait without bitterness or complaints. Maybe that's why I never broke, for hurt can turn to hope, and I live with hope. When she closed the notebook, the stars had spread themselves above the sky once more. Pollyanna dropped her arms wearily from the chest she had been trying to persuade to shut, and raised her eyes to the picture on the wall. Life softly touches those who know how to wait. Occasionally, not knowing what day it is when you wake up can be a form of peace. Pollyanna felt that very way this morning. Calendars, clocks, even the past, had lost their significance for the time being. She didn't sit up in bed immediately. Instead, she just looked up at the ceiling and thought. It was already 2 days since he had written that. But the feelings evoked were still just as crisp, just as bright as they were in that very instant. She would be amazed, as if she had grasped some lost fragment of her childhood. And then, quite possibly for the first time, she really believed the past might come back. Her aunt was up as well, and in the kitchen getting breakfast. The thick curtains were still drawn, but lemon and cinnamon scents were in the air. Pollyanna knew well how that odor smelt. It smelt of apple tarts. That tart wasn't just a dessert. It was a morsel of the house's history. It was made every summer, and mystically, each time, it aligned with an out-of-towner. The tart felt like the thing that made a house a home. Today we may have a guest, said her aunt, when Pollyanna came into the kitchen. That sentence warmed Pollyanna's heart even more than did the morning sun, because it was a signal, an unspoken promise, that the thing she had unwittingly been waiting for was going to happen. There was a visitor. Maybe her childhood friend had come through. As the letter had said, the day was beginning to dress itself carefully. The tablecloth was ironed. The china was washed. New cut wild flowers were in a glass vase. Pollyanna loops little blue ribbons around her wrists. She adored these as a child. Her aunt had pulled her hair back, and even though 2 strands floated down by her face, she didn't bother hiding them. She'd come to believe that beauty was not so much about perfection as it was about standing the test of time with grace. By noon, no one had arrived, but no one complained either. And waiting, after all, was a component of both patience and grace. Pollyanna remained in the garden, patting her gown with her hands. Beneath her feet, a little pack of ants were hauling tiny stones. How little they had, and how much they were able to accomplish. Maybe that was what the human heart was too, unseen but tireless. Then the doorbell rang. It was a gentle but firm sound, not hurried, not shy. Pollyanna did not rise. She let her aunt go alone. For dazed, she was quite helpless. She just muttered a silent prayer. Please let it be her. Her aunt came back a few seconds later, giving a small grin and a nod. And then the door opened, and out of it walked a smile that had traveled through those years to get to her. Pollyanna froze for a moment. Her friend stood before her. Her hair was a shade darker, her stature a bit greater, her face more familiar, but with a hint of the unfamiliar. They both moved a step forward, then hesitated, and they just hugged, without speaking. It was impossible to tell how long that embrace was. It could have lasted a few seconds, or maybe an entire childhood. But in that embrace, a chapter of the past reopened. No description, no apology would be needful. Sometimes time waits only for two individuals to cross paths once again. That was one of those unspoken agreements. It said itself. As they emerged to the garden, past memories crept back. As kids, they'd gone to ground beneath the same tree and spotted animal shapes in the clouds. Now, gazing up at the same sky, they didn't even ask, "Do you remember?" Because some memories are not requested. They are merely lived. Her aunt carried in tea, and the three of them sat. For a time, the exchange was formal and wary. But slowly, words softened and voices became laughter. Pollyanna's friend talked about city living and the frigid hallways of boarding school. Everything there is in good shape, she said. I long for the things that are in disorder, the ones that are like the wind. Pollyanna answered, nothing is in order here, and was silent. The wind still makes its own way. That sentence caused her friend's eyes to light up, because what we often miss is not a place, but a feeling. And Pollyanna was the embodiment of that expression. In the afternoon, they went to the river together. The path was unchanged, but the trees had grown taller, the grass that much wilder. Pollyanna, as she stepped from stone to stone, held out her hand to her friend until she steadied herself. It had always been that way. One was balanced, the other holding on to keep from falling. They were both silent, sitting by the river. For a long time, they said nothing. The air, the water, the trees. It was as if even nature had conspired to be silent, witness to this reunion. Finally, her friend turned and glanced at Pollyanna. I never told you, she said, but I took a really long time to write that letter. I was so scared you were not going to accept it. Pollyanna lowered her head. I was shaking as I typed a reply, she said. I feared I'd quit caring about you, feeling the same way. They both grinned at once, for they too had the same fears and had taken the same bold step. This was friendship in its most unadulterated human form. No blame, no harm, just remembering and coming closer once again. When they came back home in the evening, dinner was ready by her aunt. There were 3 plates on the table, not only for food, but for the years they had spent together, the silences and the tranquility between them. Twilight came, and still Pollyanna watched from her window. The sky was slightly pinker now, a little more hopeful. She picked up her notebook. There was so much to say, but she wrote just one sentence. Sometimes A letter is the only way for one heart to tell another heart that it loves. Then she closed the notebook and quietly, yet again, she whispered thanks, for out of her window, life still appeared beautiful, still seemed possible, and still was filled with friendship, the most convincing evidence that time never stops flowing, the slowly brightening morning light. Pollyanna herself had risen that morning with the feeling that the day wouldn't come empty-handed. She pulled back the curtains, and her room was flooded with golden light. The sky was awash in cotton-like clouds, and from somewhere the sparrows were chirping a raggedy tune, a cheerful reminder that life was still out there, living its full day in happiness. The house was left with a sweet animation after yesterday's visit. The flowers in the garden seemed to stand up a little straighter, and even the creases in the tablecloth appeared more dignified, glistening back at me in the sunlight. Within everything, Pollyanna was a fragile mix of past and future. Her friends' hours had filled her right back up, exactly like when words appear after a long silence, and Pollyanna, that morning, did hold her aunt's hand. It was a thank you in the form, a depth of expression that words fail. Her aunt smiled in amazement and was silent. She just clasped Pollyanna's hands more tightly. At that moment, there was no distance of years or generations. Two women exchanged the bitter kiss of farewell. One, the wooing maiden; the other, life's gray veteran. Pollyanna went to the kitchen and made some tea. It was not a day that she or Barton girl cared to go out. Opening the garden window, she found the light coolness of summer already in the room. She put an old book, small stack of envelopes, and a pencil on the table. She needed to be alone to think for the day. The table between them was silent, but not heavy. Silence was, Pollyanna often said, the next kindest thing to peace. Her aunt paged through the newspaper, her eyes lifting now and then to peer outside. All at once, Pollyanna raised her pencil and wrote without speaking. What she wrote was not a letter, and it wasn't a story. It was an echo of her inner world. Writing, sometimes, was a more profound action than thinking, for words could pull up all the things that were sleeping soundly on the edge of one's mind. The sentence she wrote first was this: a window must remain open, not only for the returnees, but also for the prospective returnees. That piece first settled itself into her heart, then loosely draped across her lines, enveloping them in its contours. Friendship was not simply hanging out. It also meant waiting, understanding, and often forgiving without ever asking. This wasn't news to Pollyanna, but she was feeling it with more conviction than she had ever felt before. Towards noon, she went out into the garden and sat down in her chair. Her gaze roamed the bed of flowers, and an alternate memory floated to her thoughts. She thought of her mother. She hadn't been able to remember her so well in so long, maybe deliberately so, and yet now, for no reason at all, it was as if she could almost hear her mother's voice, the lift of her song in the spring mornings, as she hung laundry on the line, the tenderness in her fingers as she brushed Carol's hair, the distractedness in her eyes as she looked out the window. She turned to her aunt. My mother was standing at the window, looking out for a long time. I never understood why. Now I do. Sometimes people don't watch out. They watch in through the window. Her aunt nodded. And sometimes the silence inside speaks to the wind outside, she added. The answer startled Pollyanna and filled her with satisfaction. That sentence contained a common language of loss, silence, and acceptance. The sky darkened as the day progressed. There was a sudden coolness up the grass. But it wasn't a sad change. Actually, it relieved my mind. Pollyanna re-entered the room to the sound of wind chimes in the garden. Every note was like a room opening onto another memory. And as she stepped through the doorway, a brief hush escaped her. Slow. That night she was not in the mood to write. She just sat there and listened to the sound of her own voice. She left the notebook at her side and put the pencil across the center of the page, but did not write. Not writing, as she had begun to understand, was a way of writing. 2. It was raining outside when she fell asleep in bed. The gentle tapping of droplets on the window didn't rile her. It seemed to envelop her in a melody. One thought remained with her as her eyes closed. Rain is words. Words are rain. If raindrops fall in right time, you call it rain. But if it comes in an untimely time, it shatters the branches. Life is just like that. The last thought that crossed her clouded mind was of her mother. They were sitting together in their old backyard. In her dream, they carried cups of tea. They stared at each other without speaking. She looked directly into their faces, and her mother smiled and said, "Never change, Pollyanna." And that smile was the sweetest dream to wake to. As the first dim light of dawn was coming into the room, Pollyanna awoke, this time out of a sound sleep. The dream from last night was still running through her head, like a low, buzzing aria. Her mother's sweet smile was like a flame of hope in her. Whatever the next day would bring, at least for now, she'd found a way to dig deep and forge strength from within. She gazed through the open window at the old tree branches in the garden, stirring in the breeze. The little chill brought by the wind alleviated the summer burning heat. The trees appeared to be submitting themselves to a quiet dance of rebirth. The heart of Pollyanna was already in that dance. On the rest of the table was light sandwiches of cheese and tomato made by her aunt and juice. Carefully, Pollyanna ate, and bit by bit, her thoughts fell into line, one after another. This reunion, starting with her friend's arrival, hadn't only restored old memories, it had also opened up a new page for the future. How long it would be, how full it was, still not written. As the day waned, Pollyanna crept to the darkest corner of the house. She sat on one of the worn wooden chairs and took up her diary. Oh, there was so much to write. The words, the feelings, the memories, all twining like a skein of silk in her head. When she fitted the pen in her hand, she sighed a lot and started writing out these lines in the pages. To live is in some sense to make peace with what we leave behind. To go forward is not to forget the past, but to carry it with us and chart new routes. The world I watch from my window may be different, but the feelings are still the same. As Tovate wrote, she thought about childhood games. Games were like mystery boxes filled with lost time. One of those boxes was the sound of birds, hearing them every summer. Those had once been the most precious sounds in the world, compared with the complex world her city slicker girlfriend had painted for her. Then Pollyanna would be at rest when she heard those voices. She could recall those sounds now, and She lived in the hope that one day she would hear them again. After lunch, she went for a brief stroll through the dirty town streets, so her feet trod lightly on the worn stones, leaving echoes and memories at every step. The telltale smiles lighting up the people's faces just made Pollyanna's heart swell. The town may have grown. New buildings and new people had been appended, but its spirit was still the old spirit. An old man with a soft voice wished her well as she walked. There was an aged experience in its eyes, an old knowing that Pollyanna felt within herself. They stared at each other for a long time before they even began to speak. Pollyanna said that eye greeting meant more than tongue greeting. This moment was the essence of humanity. She found her aunt had begun getting the supper. The aroma of the baking bread filled the house and was so comforting after my long day. Then they helped her in the kitchen, and they had a quiet one. It was because the lines on her aunt's face were remnants of the hardness and beauty of life. For as Pollyanna meditated on the tales of struggle behind those lines, she was impressed by how complicated and yet how simple were the ways of living to those who had learned to find God within their heart. It was late when Pollyanna sat by the window. The insects of the night were keeping up their incessant chirping, and as the stars came out and shone down upon it, she experienced a profound peace. And inside her were not only shades of the past, but also new seeds of hope. She also discovered the kind-hearted smile of the world when looked window. Before she allowed her lids to drop, she silently thanked again. This window has always been a reminder to me there is a way back. And I also know that, as on every summer day, life is beginning again. While the days were slipping away so quietly, there was a tide setting in the girl's own heart. He always stood by the window and looked out every morning. More than a habit, it had become a ritual, seeking the meaning of life. It was a fragile window between the past and the future, between hope and despair. A darker morning had never dawned. It was all gray, just. But through the gray was a gleam of brightness. Pollyanna had learned to hunt for a bit of beauty even at that gray time of life, because she understood that life is not always full of bright, clear moments. Every now and then, there is meaning even behind shadows. She saw the slight lines of fatigue creeping into her aunt's face whilst over her morning meal. They were getting older. It was a fact of life. But what they were putting at each other's disposal was priceless. And for a moment, she forgot about that. Suddenly, Pollyanna's love for her aunt surged tumultuously in her heart. Her magnetism was an unwavering comfort. As she made plans for the day, she resolved to step outside for a walk. As she ambled through the narrow winding streets of the place, each street end revealed at the other end new yarns for her to hear. The rusty doorknob, a faded poster on the wall, some chipped off stones on the pavement, all marked with traces of the past. And, stepping back from these indications, Pollyanna was touching too, her own past. The park was a couple of blocks ahead. In it, an old woman sat. Beside her was an old dog looking at her with devotion. Pollyanna came forward and spoke to them in a quiet voice. The woman smiled pleasantly, then gave way. They exchanged a few quick words. The woman told the man she had lived in this town for many years, and every tree and every bench bore a memory. As Pollyanna listened, she was thinking how a person gets established in the place he lives. Sitting in the park, she watched people's faces. They were each in their own world, their own narrative. Some were happy, some sad, some just pensive. Pollyanna realized the definition of human in this diversity. All the emotions and the times were the loom of being. She had a small bunch of wildflowers with her on the way home. The very atmosphere of the house had been changed by that bright heap, emblem of spring's gladness. Pollyanna began some that were a shade more sanguine than the others as she put the flowers into a vase. She knew the secret of life could sometimes be found in one of the most simplest things: a smile, a flower, a look. As the evening drew near, she returned to the window. This time, she watched the dim city lights blink far away, life moving, sadness and happiness, longing and acceptance. They all mixed together inside her, but they were all life. She climbed into bed and replayed the day she'd lived in her head. For Pollyanna, life was no longer merely living. It was giving meaning. It was a matter of finding and uncovering that meaning, searching it out the window. It was then that she realized those days of summer past, in her memory, were really just beginning. The days passed slowly, and with them, Pollyanna felt steal over her, something she could not, at first, understand, a sense of peace, but a peace so vast, so mighty, so all-embracing, that she almost trembled in its grasp. Summer was finally giving way in slow caress to autumn. As the world outside the window was undergoing transformations, Pollyanna was ready to undergo her very own. That morning, she remained a long while standing before the window. The wind was blowing gently outside, and the leaves on the trees were dancing. Those yellowed leaves were mute emblems of life's passing and resurrection. As she watched this unfolding process of nature, which ran from the beginning to the future time of life, Pollyanna felt there was something similar passing in her own experience. She embraced her aunt upon finishing breakfast, and there, that was the stronger message than words. She could see, feel, that the bond between them deepened as the days passed, and that what they'd been through only increased their connection with one another. Life can sometimes be too hard to live for some people, but with love and patience, everything beats up. Her daytime included a few house and garden chores. She pulled an old notebook out. Welders wear notebooks, and read what she'd written. Every word, every sentence bore witness to an age. In her case, writing was a tool for understanding the past, as well as gazing into the future with hope. It was an almost therapeutic experience that made the burden of emotions she bore inside much lighter. Late in the afternoon, she went for a walk in the small town square. She ran into familiar faces and spent time chatting with a couple of friends. The people's vitality gave Pollyanna hope. With every life, they contributed something to the world. She suddenly saw that all people look at life through their own window and interpret life accordingly. She sat facing the window as the sun went down. The sky had turned orange, pink, and purple. These were colors to represent the transformation within Pollyanna and the start of something new. The beautiful world outside gave her an intense feeling of peace and happiness in her heart. As she lay in her bed, Her lids drooping with fatigue, the idea occurred to her. Every window is a story of a life. Each day of summer is hope and renewal. To peer through the window of Pollyanna is to see not just the world, but oneself. Pollyanna's remembrance of that summer day, therefore, could never die except as the day before a new era